Hello, this is my classroom observation for EDU 654 Urban Challenge. The school that I was at is now called School 1A High School. It's a suburban school in New Jersey, northern Jersey, outside of New York City. The class that I observed was my Technology and Engineering Foundations class. It's a ninth grade course with 15 students, and it's small for the school. Usually 24 is the cap, and approximately each class is like 19 kids in it. Um, my class of 15 had 5 females and 10 males. Approximately 60% of the students in the class were people of color. There was one 504 identified English language learner, and then 40% of the students, as noted from a poll in the beginning of the year, they speak a second language other than English at home. The class meets 3 out of 4 days in a cycle for 55 minutes each, and it's held in the woodshop lab that you can see above. So classroom is pretty neat. We have a full operating wood shop. There's a digital fabrication lab across the hall. There's a projector screen for one-to-many presentations, as well as a TV that you can bring up to a table. So if you want kind of all hands on deck around a table, learning about a tool, which I did in the unit that I'm going to talk about in a sec, we would bring a TV to a table and have the tools on the table and start learning about them together there. So the unit in particular that I focused on for this observation was a USB redesign project where students dissect, document, and model a USB flash drive digitally using computer-aided design, or CAD. The classes that I did videotape for this observation are highlighted in blue here. The students were learning a new tool, how to measure stuff using digital calipers to get precise measurements rather than using, say, a ruler or tape measure. So they were really looking at precision measurement and dimensioning a real object and documenting that object so that they could then recreate it in CAD, so on the computer. So again, I had 4 classes that I videotaped. Obviously, this unit's a bit longer. Takes about a month and a half for students to get through and fully redesign a USB and 3D print a new enclosure for it. So what were the students learning as I was observing those 4 classes? They were learning about a new tool to measure things and how to operate that tool. And we were working in large groups to do very one-to-many. So I was dispersing some information to my students on how to use the tool. Then that went into smaller group testing and playing around with the tool and measuring some stuff, and then individual utilization where the students are measuring their own USBs and documenting and diagramming those measurements. So really, the students are learning how to measure, how to then document that measurement, and turn it into something that they can create either a drawing with or a CAD document with. So some of these things down here at the bottom, I was working on differentiating and figuring out how to best meet each student's needs as we were going. Some students, and you can see here on the left, were great. They could sketch the USB quite cleanly and easily, and then diagram the dimensions on it. Whereas other students, maybe it was easier and quicker and cleaner for them to make a digital representation using photographs of the USB and then quickly slap some dimensions on there. The end goal was to just document the dimensions in millimeters and metric, and then eventually, you can see in the bottom right here, maybe 1 or 2 classes after those 4 that I observed, the students would model the actual USB on their CAD program on software here. So how do these observations inform what I need to do better in the future? Definitely need to get better at pre-assessing sketching skills and allowing for that to determine student choice of how they document their measurements as they get them. I need more tools and more resources for my students to mess around with as I'm doing that large group instruction. I only had 6 calipers and I had 15 kids, so there were 9 students that when they got to actually practicing with the tool in small groups or individually, they had questions that could have been addressed earlier if they had the tool in their hand. So more tools, extending the guided notes with practice problems so that when they get to actually implementing this tool in practice, they've all had a fair amount of practice with it. And I definitely need to get better clarity for what my students are doing. In particular, one thing that popped up, my ELL student was asking which USB we were modeling or diagramming. Was the one they brought in, or was the one that I had up on the screen? And I would like to do a little bit more PD for inclusivity and multicultural ed. Again, I have 40% of my students speaking another language at home, and then 68% of my student body in the class was students of color. So how can I better relate to their lives primarily, and then maybe bring in a little bit of the content so I can better let them see how it affects their lives. Particular the course content and readings, how they related to how I was operating the classroom. I found that in kind of the Freirian way, I was prescribing what my students were doing. They didn't have all that much choice in how they were approaching, like either sketching or digitally documenting the measurements. Next year, there's a push at my school for universal design for learning. I want to figure out how to pre-assess and then also give upfront that choice to my students so that they can better document those measurements in a way that's comfortable for them. I found that I was definitely taking the time at the beginning of class to not just get into the content, but build that relationship with my students, see how their day is going, just kind of take the temperature. And then as I was talking with my students and giving them independent feedback, I was able to kind of have some one-on-one conversations and get to know them a little bit better. So I was really kind of showing, again, that care in kind of the Noddings way or Oak's relationship fashion to give them that one-on-one relationship that they need, see who they are, allow them to talk and listen to them and build that trust. And definitely as I was walking around, I was letting the kids like vent their frustrations if they were having an issue with a tool. I was giving them that one-on-one time. And I was allowing them to also kind of allow some ownership of change in the class. So if we needed to go over something again the next day, their exit ticket was a way for them to communicate that with me as well. I definitely need to embed myself in my community a bit more. I need to find more ways to see them in sports situations or outside of the classroom, just to connect with my students a little bit more. And definitely the smaller class size of this class allowed me to connect with my students, and they weren't allowed to kind of like drift through the class. I probably had like one student who was a little shy and didn't really want to connect, but the smaller class size really allowed me to meet each student at certain points in the class. Were students with different backgrounds made to feel valued and able to achieve the goals that we set out to do in the class? I would say yes. The students with variabilities, they worked individually on a common task, so I was able to differentiate for some students that weren't able to draw so well or not do the same thing in a certain amount of time, allow them to modify their tasks. They were giving feedback to each other. They were helping each other in those smaller groups at their tables. Definitely at the end of class, I had a little rubric that I would do for their work, for their sketches or whatever artifact they were doing during the day, and they would peer review each other to see if they needed to kind of fix something in the last few minutes of class. They were allowed to, again, complete the same thing in a different media, just as above. They're working on a common task with maybe different ways. And that exit ticket again, and that one-on-one time, those were two different ways for students to have voice in what we move forward with, what we loop back on, all that sort of stuff. What struck me, the ELL students, they're asking me about which USB were we documenting, the one on the screen or the one in front of them that they brought in. I need to be more clear in my gesturing and the way I'm communicating stuff. I need to keep using wait time. I noticed sometimes I was rushing into conversations, and I really need to let the kids speak. I need to make a better procedure, I noticed, for as I float around, how to get kids to know, hey, I will be there. And then I need more ways to relate the content and tools to my students' everyday lives. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you have a great day.